Hello and welcome to another edition of the Hooligan Report. I'm joined by Bojan.
Hi, mate. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm your host as always, SM. So we'll get stuck into the week that was in the Premier League, and there's a few interesting results to chat about. We'll start with the game between Man City and Everton, where Everton actually surprised me a little bit. I thought that they would struggle a bit more than they did against Man City, especially away from home. And perhaps in part that was due to the heroics of Stekelenburg in goal for them. But how did you see this one, Bojan?
Oh, look, I thought Coman set Everton up pretty well from a defensive perspective. That's something that's certainly improved since he took over from Roberto Martinez. But Man City really should have won this game quite comfortably, in my opinion. They had the majority of possession and had it in good areas. They'd just been struggling over the last, few games to kind of capitalise on that possession and take their chances. They've won a lot of penalties this year, but yeah, they're not putting them away. I mean, the two penalties, of full credit to Stekelenburg, but that's really where the keeper wants it. Kind of halfway up the goal, halfway towards the corner. It's kind of perfect for the keeper. So, full credit to him, but yeah, those penalties were pretty poor, and I wouldn't say there's any too much to worry about with regards to Man City, but I did find it strange that Kun didn't start against Barcelona, and I note that Pep's come out and says Aguero will decide his own future. I won't decide it for him, which is kind of is I'm not sure how you interpret that. Is that him saying, well, maybe Aguero, you're not good enough and I'm going to bring in someone else and you can decide whether you want to stay or leave, or is it saying he's out of form and he needs a few weeks off? I'm not quite sure. So I wouldn't be worrying too much if I was a Man City fan, but, they probably want to start taking their chances pretty soon. And in terms of Everton, that they kind of showed that a lot of mental resilience and have done since the start of the season. And if anyone was underrating Ronald Koeman going into this season, I think they've been given a wake up call. He's a top class manager.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say they've kind of struggled in recent games, Manchester City that is, and it's interesting that even though De Bruyne returned and started this game, he couldn't have the impact that perhaps people thought he might have had. I mean, you look at the stats of when he plays versus when he doesn't play, and that sort of excused perhaps their results in recent weeks. But returning, perhaps he's a bit underdone, so that might explain it on this occasion. But as you say, the two penalties were pretty poor from De Bruyne and Aguero. I can't remember who it was, but I saw one of the commentators discussing the fact that both Aguero and De Bruyne are right-footed, but they put the ball to the left of the keeper, and when you're doing that, the ball is always going to be curling back towards the keeper. Whereas if you're right-footed and you take it to the right of the keeper, the ball's going to always be curling away from the keeper, which I thought was a really interesting insight and a really good point into the fact that, as you say, that the balls are basically put exactly where the keeper would want it. I mean, he had to stretch a little bit on the Aguero one, but both relatively comfortable saves in terms of penalties. But yeah, I mean,
And
it's impressive, an impressive performance by Everton.
if you are going to go that side, you really need to be hitting the ball a bit harder than that too,
Yeah.
because you see kind of quite a few penalties that kind of half saved, but the keeper can't quite get enough on them and they still go in, but they're just not hard enough in the wrong spot.
And then obviously
So
they Man City also lost 4-0 to Barcelona midweek in the Champions League with Bravo being sent off. Did you make much of that, or was that sort of just a it's tough going to play Barcelona and that sort of thing can happen to sides, or do you look at Bravo's performance perhaps and think that really kind of might say a lot about where Man City are at the moment?
I don't think it says anything about where Man City are at, and how they perform for the rest of the season. I think that what it shows, I don't think that the Man City defenders are giving enough options for Bravo. So they want Bravo to kind of or play the ball out of defence, but you look at the way Barca kind of play, and that's the system he's come from. The fullbacks will spread to the corner flags for that out pass, and the defensive midfielder Busquets will trying to tuck in and trying to collect the ball. There's just isn't that movement at the moment from Man City's defenders and defensive midfielder. So that's something that you would expect to improve over the course of the season. It's not going to be great for his confidence. For Bravo's confidence, he's just pretty much just turned up in the league. He was very shaky against United. He's been shaky in a few other games. I know that Moomba on the board's been saying, he's had 200 passes that have been completed, short passes, and he's been really good. He's really important, but the 3 passes where he's passed to the opposition, that's the only stat that people really care about, because those are the ones that cost you games. So I wouldn't be reading too much into that. I would say that did it roll over 4-0? That doesn't say much for City's defenders. They started the season really well, and I think the fact that they have so much possession, kind of what people were saying about United last year, is that defence actually good? They just shot the ball the whole time, which means they're not defending much. I'm still not convinced by a lot of Man City's defenders. John Stones started the season really, really well, but again, he didn't really have too much actual defending to do. It was more him bringing the ball out the back and showing off his passing repertoire, but won him plaudits. I think one-on-one he's got a lot to work on in his game. Otamendi's been poor pretty much ever since he turned up in the league, and stick a fork in Vincent Kompany. He told the club doctor he wasn't prepared to play in this game because he wasn't fit, even though the club doctor said, medically you're right. So the midfield and forward half is formidable for Man City. And they actually, despite United spending 89 million on Pogba, they actually spent more than us this summer. I wouldn't be surprised if in January and at very least next summer you see a kind of 100+ million go into that defence, because that defence is pretty old as well. Clichy, Sanya, Kolarov, Kompany, these guys aren't getting any younger. They've got one 10-year player there, most likely in Stones. They'll probably be spending big money on bringing in some high-quality defenders.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting times for Man City, and especially Kompany. It'll be interesting to see where he goes to from here, because it does just look like his body's letting him down. We'll move on and sadly perhaps spend a little bit of time chatting about the pretty appalling defeat by Hull against Bournemouth, losing 6-1 away from home. And I guess the really disappointing aspect of this was, and it was summed up by Curtis Davies after the game, was we have excuses for previous performance where you say, well, we were a man down against Arsenal and Liverpool. We were playing against the big clubs when we lost to Chelsea and Arsenal and Liverpool. But against Bournemouth, we played 11 men for the whole game. We were playing a side in and around our position in the league. We really should have been much more motivated for the game, looking at it as a game where we really needed to get points out of it, and to capitulate in the way we did was just absolutely dismal. And you could see it from the start of the game. I wouldn't be surprised if we had less than 10 tackles in the first half, because we just sat off Bournemouth so much. And unfortunately, Will Keane from United only had 1 touch in the first half and really was basically invisible in the game, which is really disappointing from his point of view.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the defensive partnership between, was it Livermore and Curtis Davies, which was so successful at the start of the year, was kind of broken up for this game by Phelan, and he put Livermore in midfield.
It was interesting because it's one of those ones where, as a supporter, we've been saying for weeks that we want to see Maguire in defence. So whilst we can put the blame on Phelan for changing that around, it's not as if we haven't been calling for that ourselves. So it's one of those hard ones where you say, well, yeah, that's what we wanted, and clearly it hasn't worked. So perhaps it's kind of on us to some extent. But yeah, I don't know. And that's the really interesting thing, because looking at that lineup going into that game, I was really excited, and I really liked the way that he changed the team around, because that's the sort of lineup I would have liked to see, and getting a chance to see Keane start a game and see what he could do was a good thing. But so as much as I want to blame Phelan for the lineup, that's with the benefit of hindsight, and at the time I was actually quite happy with it. Yeah,
look, I think Bournemouth are fairly underrated, and particularly I really enjoy the way that Eddie Howe plays his football.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really try and play properly. That's probably not going to be suited towards a team like Hull and the kind of. So I wouldn't be too concerned about not picking up points against these. If you don't pick up points against the Burnleys of the world, those are the games I'd be more concerned about.
It's more the manner of the defeat,
Bournemouth.
though. To concede 6 goals is quite concerning.
Yeah, do you think that has something to do with the fact that you weren't, because you had no players, you weren't able to rotate at the start of the year? You think some guys are
Might be getting tired, maybe. Yeah,
perhaps
I mean,
tired?
it's interesting as well. I mean, I was discussing with another City supporter the other night. I mean, in some ways, it might even be the fact that the players that we had at the start of the year aren't in the side at the moment. Your David Myler, your Tom Huddleston, who actually, for instance, Huddleston, really important to have playing because he can control the tempo of the game so well, and he can actually, with his passing, really bring us back into the game, spray the passes out wide, and give our runners a bit of room on the wings. But playing, I mean, Clucas, what was it? Clucas, Livermore, and Mason in that midfield three with Maloney and Snodgrass on the wings. Just I'm not sure if that worked, and Maloney's one especially, who while he's looked really good off the bench, I just don't see as a starter. I mean, he's great to throw on a game late, and he did quite well for us against Swansea and then against Burnley, coming on late in games with his really good foot skills and his passing ability. But I just don't think he has the legs to start a game. And maybe you're right. I mean, Davies had a really great start to the season, and he just seems to have lost a bit of confidence at the moment. But I think Michael Dawson should be back tonight, which will hopefully shore up that defence again. But it's a must-win game against Stoke, which we'll chat about later. But from an outsider's point of view, do you think if we lost tonight that Phelan could be under any pressure, or far too soon?
Oh, well, depends on the ownership situation, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I mean, from an outsider looking in, my concern with Hull would be the fact that they don't seem to pose much threat going forward aside from set pieces.
Yeah.
It seems like a team definitely set up to kind of get the ball down to the corner flag and win some corners, and probably as well as scoring from corners, hope that Snodgrass can put a few free kicks into the goal from free kicks. So I'd be more concerned about the lack of threat in the attacking third. But I don't think that's the fault of Mike Phelan. I mean, people will probably say that I'm biased because of his links to United. But in all fairness to him, it's not like he was given his pick of players.
Yeah.
During the transfer window, he was kind of given, 13, 14 players and told to do your best. And I think he's done all that could be expected of him. Hopefully your ownership situation can be resolved and you can bring in some reinforcements in January.
Yeah, hopefully that's the case. I mean, there's a bid on the table at the moment, and I guess we'll see how that pans out. But we've had 2 failed takeover bids already this season, so it's sort of a case of just waiting and hope at this stage. We'll then talk about Chelsea against Leicester, where Chelsea ran out 3-0 victors at home, which is almost becoming a familiar sight for Leicester supporters, going away to a big club and kind of getting belted in the end and not really looking too much of a threat themselves. Do you see it as much of a concern from a Leicester point of view, or do you think that they've just got their focus on the Champions League at this stage?
I think they definitely have their focus on the Champions League. I think that is a little bit of a risky proposition, because unless they win the Champions League, they won't be in it next year. So you're going to lose your kind of Riyad Mahrez caliber players next year anyway.
Yeah.
Because, they might have turned down Arsenal this year because they're in the Champions League, but they won't be turning down Arsenal and the bigger clubs next season. I was a little bit, while I enjoy it, I was a little bit disturbed by their performance when they came to United. They started relatively well, first 15 minutes, and United really blew them away. I think they were up 3-0 at half time. And then I think they started the second half, and Vardy, Mahrez, and Drinkwater on the bench.
Yeah.
They pretty much just kind of gave up. And then they've approached some of these league games with a similar kind of mentality. It's almost, which I think sends the wrong message to the playing squad, that they don't need to turn up during the week. Sorry, they don't need to turn up on weekends just during the week for Champions League games. So the way they're going, I can see them kind of slipping to a 12th to 14th kind of finish. I think they've got enough to be safe. I like the look of Slimani, Damari Gray's playing well, and Drinkwater's having a really good season. But yeah, I don't agree with what they're doing, but if I'm a Leicester fan, just enjoy those Wednesday nights.
From a Chelsea point of view, do you think that they've kind of sorted out their issues? I mean, they've switched to a three at the back, and do you see that
Mm.
working better for them and perhaps letting them push up towards a top four finish? Because, I mean, the talk at the start of the season when they were one of the three undefeated teams was perhaps not challenging for the title, but certainly seemed to be for a top four finish. But in recent weeks, they've kind of slipped off the pace a little bit, and perhaps they're even going under the radar a bit now.
Well, I don't think they're going to contend for top four because I don't think they've got the quality in defence to do that. I'm really hoping that Conte actually succeeds at Chelsea because I like his system. I like the way he sets up, and if you appreciate the tactical side of the game, it's really enjoyable. But he just hasn't got the cattle. What was really interesting that came out was it earlier this week, I think, was that Chelsea's director of football's been not sacked, but moved. So Chelsea are going to bring in a new director of football to go and find players and do transfers. So Mourinho basically left Chelsea, or the whole thing capitulated, because he wanted to get rid of a couple of players who were bad for the dressing room, namely Jed Costa and Cesc Fabregas, who ended up, being the ones who were leaking things to the media later on and causing the disharmony in the squad. And he wanted to bring in a couple of new players to freshen up the squad, one of which was Paul Pogba, who ended up obviously getting this year at United. And they had a huge falling out, Manalo and Mourinho. And all the signs over the summer was that Conte wanted to go and get Koulibaly, wanted to go and get Manolas from Roma. And Manalo just couldn't get it done or didn't want to bring in these players and ended up going back to David Luiz. Who you all know what David Luiz is, right? He's a fair liability. He's got a lot of talent, but he's a liability in defence.
He's basically, I mean, from memory, I mean, he even did he start his career in midfield and move to defence, or was it just something that he always sort of flitted between the two? Because he seems to me a much more reliable player in midfield where he's not as close to goal and not as liable for a defensive mishap.
That's a fair way. Yeah, that's absolutely a fair call. I mean, he's got a lot of which attracts clubs to kind of buy him, but he's not a top level defender. And it's interesting that I can't remember the coach that was it Unai Emery went to PSG?
To PSG, yeah.
The Sevilla. Yeah, the old Sevilla coach. First thing he did, see you later, David Luiz, you can't defend. So yeah, I think the fact that he's got a lot of ability on the ball, has probably made his career, because defensively he's always a liability who's waiting to happen. So I think Chelsea will contend next year. I think the back three will come together. The back three with the wing backs, because you've got so many defenders on the field, that will kind of cover up the fact that individually, one on one, you'll look shaky. I mean, if you've got Luiz with his him being a liability potentially defensively next to John Terry, who great defender, but he's slow as anything these days. They're gonna concede goals, but if you've got a back five effectively, that should prevent that, and they've still got enough going forward. So not top four this year for mine, but certainly next year.
Well, we'll talk about the club that Mourinho left Chelsea for now, and you had a 0-0 draw with Liverpool on the Monday night, on Red Monday, which was a bit underwhelming after all the build-up, I must say. Getting up for that one was not the highlight of my week. How did you see the game? Obviously, there's been a bit of debate on the board about which side was more at fault for the way the game panned out, and some say, well, it was a Liverpool home game. They had all of the possession, but they could only manage 3 shots on goal. Others say, well, Mourinho went to Liverpool with a game plan to sort of stifle Liverpool's play, and whilst fair play to him, that got him the result he wanted in a draw. After all of the money that you've spent and sort of the ambitions that you should be having, going to the club and expecting a draw is a poor way of looking at things. I mean, those are the two sort of views that I've seen on the board, but how do you see it?
I'll make a few points. styles make fights. If anyone listening's into boxing, it's a commonly used term. So, Mourinho's done and look, Sir Alex Ferguson did this every year. This is not a new thing. You go to Anfield, you go to Stamford Bridge, you go to the Emirates, and you set up and you say, we're not going to lose this game. At worst, we'll get a draw. We'll grind it out and get a draw. Liverpool have been flying. United have been stuttering. So to think that Mourinho, with quite a few players missing, is going to turn up at Anfield and leave himself open, I don't think so. Yeah. So he set up the team in a way where he asked Ashley Young and Marcus Rashford to defend quite deep, which is kind of quite funny because Job keeps saying on the board how Milner dominated Rashford. Well, he actually watched the game. Rashford and Young were sitting really deep and really doing defensive jobs, trying to stop the overlap with people like Milner and the midfielders drifting out there. So, in terms of the spend's very irrelevant unless you're discussing probably the end result of the season. So that doesn't really matter now. Something to be said for the fact that Mourinho's only been there for 2 or 3 months. So whereas Liverpool under Klopp are a long way further in their development. In terms of the game, it was kind of there's no doubt it was boring, and I'll mention that I appreciate the tactical masterclasses that Conte's teams can put on. This wasn't that kind of game. This was a very scrappy game. Ander Herrera was magnificent, really. Didn't put a foot wrong all night and stifled any potential attacks that Liverpool had. And when they did pull something out of their arse, i.e. Coutinho, David De Gea, world class. Never doubt him.
What did you make of Mourinho's comments in relation to Ibra, and was it Pogba as well that he was sort of criticising after the game, and the way that Ibra missed that chance?
Yeah. So we looked back at. I mean, I watched a lot of Italian football and have done since I was a child. Really, so I enjoy that. Big fan of guys like Francesco Totti and Toscano and those kind of guys. Look, at Juventus, he had Mandzukic, who moves a lot up front, and Paulo Dybala, who's quick, plays on the shoulder. Ibrahimovic started the season on fire, but he's been poor, really poor the last.
Is that concerning for
probably
you?
say the last month.
Do you see that
no, not really, because I don't think we can win the title this year.
Okay.
So I would. So Ibrahimovic's contract is he's got a 1-year deal with a club as an option to extend it by a year. Right? If he keeps this up, they won't extend it. He's too static. It's not that he's not doing X, Y, and Z, but Pogba gets the ball in midfield, he just breezes past 2 or 3 because it's just pure athleticism. He looks up, and there's no Ibrahimovic is coming towards him, whereas Pogba's looking for that through ball. Whether it was last year, it was to Dybala or the ball over the top, and there's just no one there at the moment. So I'd imagine I wouldn't be against Ibrahimovic having a rest and us putting Rashford up front. So I think that Rashford getting those through balls, those balls over the top, using his pace to be really damaging with Pogba.
I think it's interesting because, I mean, Rashford's sort of been pushed out wide to accommodate Ibra, but I definitely agree. I mean, I think giving Rashford that chance up top might be a much better option for you guys and much more dynamic.
Well, the good thing about Mourinho is if you do your job, you'll stay in the side. So Marcus Rashford will be in the side on the weekend because Mourinho gave him a job on Monday night and he fulfilled it completely. So he'll be playing again. If Ibrahimovic goes down for whatever reason and Rashford starts banging goals, Rashford will stay up top. That's the good thing about Jose. He'll reward that. So I mean, going forward, it's positive for us. Look, we've got Martial played in the Europa League and looked good, so he'll be back for the weekend. That's promising. Mkhitaryan apparently is 2 weeks away. Just started training. Luke Shaw as well. So there's a lot still to come back in the side. So there are signs, but we're far from the finished article. Liverpool, Daniel Sturridge,
Yeah, he was
poor,
woeful. He was so poor.
poor, really poor.
Every touch.
Yeah, it's interesting that Jamie Carragher gave him a little bit of a bait as well in the post match. He looks, for a guy who's a confidence player, he looks devoid of it at the moment, and that's
Yeah.
probably maybe coming off a Euros in which he was probably a little bit selfish. Didn't dig the ball up much and shooting a lot. I mean, you looked at kind of the difference between him last year to this year versus Raheem Sterling last year in the Euros. Couldn't hit a barn door, couldn't do anything, to this year where he's absolutely flying. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, they've still got a lot. I think they'll push for top four, but I really can't tell with them because they're just as likely to go and batter Arsenal, Chelsea, whoever 3-0 as they are to go and get rolled by Burnley. It's just that kind of stuff.
Well, speaking of Arsenal, we'll mention the other results from the weekend and just run through them. I mean, we had Arsenal beating Swansea 3-2, which I guess was actually a pretty good result for Arsenal because Swansea generally have had their measure in recent seasons. And it was obviously first outing for Bob Bradley, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes with Swansea going forward. Stoke got a pretty handy win against Sunderland 2-0, and you've got to say it must be almost curtains for David Moyes.
Yeah, Moyes struggling.
Yeah,
no doubt about that. I mean,
can't see how much longer they hold on with him though.
He's not the only Sunderland manager who's going to struggle at the start of the season. I think there's some ridiculous stat like they
hadn't won a game in August or September for 4 years or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. I guess going with that theme, West Brom got a 1-1 draw with Spurs, which was a good result for West Brom. But I think it might be 3 seasons in a row that they've had a 1-1 draw with Spurs at the Hawthorns or something like that. I think I saw.
Well, that's the whole thing. Look, the guys on the board who are complaining about Pulis, I mean, give it a rest. If you want him to stop doing that, you got to beat his teams and make him change it.
And Chadley not celebrating scoring the goal. What's your thought on players not celebrating when they score against a former club?
Oh, I remember you asking me this question a few years ago, actually. But when Welbeck scored against United, I don't mind. I don't mind. I won't begrudge players celebrating goals. Obviously not in the Adebayor style, but if you score, it's an emotional thing. So go for it. When you're talking about Arsenal earlier, beating Swansea, they're kind of in the league, just doing enough at the moment. I think they're looking really dangerous for all the trolling I do about Wenger being, the specialist in failure and that. He's turned
them around pretty well.
They're just getting the breaks. And I'm not saying that as in, they're lucky, they're only winning through luck, but, champions do get the breaks.
Yeah.
Right, they got that, like Koscielny punching the ball in the net and got away with that. And,
the late penalty against Southampton as well.
Late penalty against Southampton. They've had a few of those this year. And, they'll be, if they can stay up here, they'll be dangerous. And, can you explain to me what's happening with Theo Walcott? This bloke has been a shit truck for years. He turns it on for like 3 or 4 games a season on 140 grand a week. He's the butt of pretty much 50% of Premier League jokes in the pub.
But I'll tell you what,
he's turned into a temporary superstar.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, I've just brought him into my fantasy side this week, so you can guarantee the streak of form is over. He's going to get a red card this weekend against Middlesbrough, and then that'll be it. He's done. West Ham got a pretty handy win against Palace away from home, which can I think it's actually taken them out of the bottom 3 for the first time this season, which will be a bit of relief for their supporters. But pretty terrible penalty missed by Benteke, if you've seen that one. I mean, it's pouring with rain. All he has to do, and the keeper pretty much moves before he hits it. All he has to do is either get some lift on it, but you don't have to go for the top corner the way he does. I mean, it's a bit of a weird one, but. Watford beating Middlesbrough 1-0 away from home as well. Holobas scored an absolute screamer, which was a great goal in
Mm.
an otherwise pretty drab game.
Go Watford.
And Southampton 3-1 winners at home to Burnley, which I thought was a pretty routine, expected result.
Yeah, but they haven't been playing, free flowing football this year for Southampton, so it was good to, see them actually rack up the goals.
All right. Well, we'll do the previews now for the weekend. With the first game of the weekend's fixtures tonight between Bournemouth and Spurs. Bournemouth at home in that one. We've just been talking about how Bournemouth are actually looking pretty decent, and they've actually been really good at home as well. I think they've won their last 3 games there, and they've only conceded 1 goal, which, funnily enough, was against us. I mean, that was probably their best win there, but that was the only goal they conceded. Any danger posed for Spurs travelling down there, or do you think Spurs, against a side that likes to play that open, attacking football, might actually be able to press them quite well?
Oh, I think the key for Spurs will be how Alderweireld's replacement kind of fits in. So if it's Dyer, or if it's, what's his name, Carter Vickers-Lewis, whatever the hell his name is.
Is Wimmer also a centre-back?
No, he's banished. He's been banished.
Oh, okay.
He is he's kind of like a utility defender, like David Blind style. But he hasn't got much game time this year and was pretty mouthy when he was away on international duty. Had an absolute mare, and so Pochettino, you can't be doing that with him. So he's not. I don't think he's even in the squad for that game. So probably going to be Eric Dyer. I fancy, given the form that Bournemouth are in, I've probably got a little bit more faith in them than most. I fancy a pretty entertaining 1-1 draw. Spurs, similar to the way Arsenal were kind of just getting the job done. Spurs are hard to beat, fairly mentally resilient, which is certainly something pretty much I haven't seen in my lifetime. Aside from, no, I'm actually being serious.
Yeah.
Aside from Pochettino, it's actually put that in. He's ingrained that in the team.
No, I'm laughing because it's true, and I mean, yeah, as you said, they've certainly flown under the radar. I think they're still undefeated. I think they're the only side left undefeated in the league, and obviously with that really impressive win against Man City recently as well. Surprised they're not talked about more often than they are, but I have a feeling I had them coming second or third in my prediction pre-season, so glad they're sort of living up to that. I tend to agree. I mean, I think Bournemouth at home is a pretty interesting proposition. I think it'll be a pretty entertaining game to watch. I do think Spurs can just get the edge in this one. I think it'll be 2-1 or something like that, so I think it'll be a pretty tightly contested game, but one pretty interesting to watch. We then have Arsenal at home to Middlesbrough, which I sort of alluded to before with Walcott. And Walcott's in pretty fine form at the moment. But Arsenal as a whole, I mean, they beat Ludogorets midweek 6-0, I think it was, with Ozil getting his first senior hat-trick, which is pretty staggering when you think about it. But how do you see this one panning out, especially with Middlesbrough not really in the best of form?
Oh, look, the 6-0 against Ludogorets, that's Arsenal all over. Downhill, Josh Kennedy, just ski down that hill. So this week against Borough don't concede too many. So is this at the Emirates?
It's at the Emirates, yeah. So I mean, Borough are pretty good defensively at home, but away from home they might struggle a bit.
Yeah, I think I'll back Arsenal to keep the train going, and I'll say 3-0.
Yeah, I think Arsenal. I agree on that one. I think Arsenal will do this one pretty comfortably, 2 or 3-0 as well. West Ham at home to Sunderland. I mean, West Ham and Sunderland had pretty tough fixtures last week in terms of 6-point fixtures, and they now face each other. West Ham having won theirs against Palace, Sunderland having lost theirs against Stoke. We've already talked about Moyes a little bit, but is this almost do or die for him? Is this something he needs to get a point out of or needs to get a result out of? Because I've seen in the papers they're already talking about Big Sam perhaps coming in and taking
Mm.
over.
Yeah, look, I mean that wouldn't surprise me at all. Really, the list they've got isn't too flash, and yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I think the United experience has just sapped the confidence out of Moyes
Yeah.
completely. I think he lacks confidence in his own ability. What happened at Sociedad wouldn't have helped either. Um, so yeah, I think that although it's a little bit silly because with that squad, how much better can it do? But I think the change will be made soon. West Ham, well, they're really struggling, and they really needed 3 points here. They're just not playing. Just not playing good football. There's been a mentality change in that club over the last 4 months. I'd say, which hasn't played well for them. But I'll say they'll get the job done 2-1.
I've realised it's at home for West Ham though, so that's almost it's funny in the sense that West
Mm.
Ham at home are almost worse than they are away because of the
Mm-hmm.
issues with their supporters. But um, yeah, I think West Ham will get up in this one. I really can't see Sunderland getting a result in this game, but stranger things have happened. But yeah, I'll go 2-0 to West Ham in this one, I think. Um, then we have Leicester at home to Crystal Palace, and Leicester have looked a lot better at home than they have away, and especially against the lower clubs, they seem to be quite solid at home. I think last time out at home they might have beaten Burnley, or they might have had a draw with Southampton. I can't remember if it was one of those two games. But they're coming up against Crystal Palace, who lost last time out. Do you see Palace posing much threat to Leicester, or do you think Leicester will knock them off?
Oh, you mean you'd have to think that Leicester, if they put their proper first 11 out there, if they turn up with the right mentality, they should win this game quite comfortably. But they've been pretty soft so far this year in the league. I'm just not quite sure that without Wilfred Zaha, do they have the threat? That's not who's the bloke? Balassi. Do they have the threat going forward to really hurt Leicester? I mean, Leicester is still, at least on paper, looking at last year, fairly solid defensively. And I don't think there's going to be enough firepower going forward for Palace. So I'll back Leicester in 3-1.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think maybe 2-0 or 3-1 to Leicester. It'll be interesting to see how Benteke bounces back, whether that that bad penalty miss sort of scars him a little bit because he's had a pretty decent start to his time with Palace, but it'll be interesting to see how he kicks on. And yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, coming off a Champions League game where the Leicester actually have a bit more zip in their step, and it's interesting to see Danny Simpson saying that they had a bit of a talking to between all the players after the Chelsea result. And all of the focus is now back on, and everyone's refocused, and we're all motivated. And you hear that sort of thing after a big loss, and you never know quite what to think about it, so it'll be interesting to see how they go against Palace, and I do think they'll get the win in that one. Next up is Hull at home to Stoke, and I can't be too confident going into this one. I really think Stoke will probably beat us, especially they've taken 4 points in their last two games. Joe Allen's decided to turn back into the Welsh Perlo or the Welsh Xavi or whoever you want to compare him
Mm.
to. And even we beat them in the cup quite recently, where they played a pretty much full strength side, and we played most of our new signings, so it was mainly depth players. And I mean, even Weir was playing in that game, and he actually got the assist for the winner. And Henriksen got the actual goal for the winner. Mason scored the first goal, and that was away from home. But even at home, the way we're playing at the moment, and the way Stoke have a bit more confidence in the way they're playing, I can't really take anything too much. I can't take any confidence into this game. But what do you reckon?
Well, Stoke aren't exactly setting the world on fire at the moment either, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. What's the home support like these days at Hull?
Oh,
Are people still staying away?
no, yeah, they are. They are. It's absolutely dreadful, and there's actually just been an article written about it, which I didn't get a chance to read before we came on, but it's sounding like there's going to be about 7,000 less at this game than our
Oh, okay.
previous worst crowd against Stoke. So not even 7,000 missing full stop, 7,000 less than our worst attendance against Stoke, which is just, yeah, it's dreadful. And hopefully with the news of impending takeovers or change of ownership or whatever, hopefully that'll galvanise people to come back. But it's quite worrying because once people lose that bug, lose that motivation to go to games, it's actually quite hard to motivate them to start going again on a regular occurrence.
Young players, mate. Give them something to hope for.
Yeah.
That's the key. In terms of this game, look, I'll be generous and say that Hull will eke out a 1-1 draw.
And I'll take that quite gladly. Burnley at home to Everton. Everton, yeah, we've already talked about them a bit. They seem to be getting bouncing back into shape. They had a little bit of a dip in form recently, but with that draw against City, they might have some of that confidence back. Burnley, really sort of they're a bit of a strange one because when you watch them, they're almost like the opposite of Liverpool, and funnily enough, they got that win against Liverpool. But you can watch them against the big clubs, and sometimes they'll come out and actually do really well and really surprise you, and then sometimes they'll just be completely flat and kind of go into their shells and not really offer much at all. So, which Burnley do you think will get in this one? Do you think Everton will? It's at home for Burnley as well. Do you think Everton will run away with this one?
Oh, look, I just think Everton are just so professional this year in comparison to previous years, and Koeman's a smart manager and he'll have them set up in a way that'll just exploit Burnley's weaknesses. And I can see guys like Lukaku and Deulofeu. It's really important for Everton going forward, though, that Ross Barkley gets to some form. Yeah. And Koeman's kind of been pretty hard on him so far. So I really like watching him in full flight, so I'm hoping that he comes back into form. But in terms of this game, I can see a relatively easy 3-0 victory for Everton.
I think I'm with you on that one as well, 3-0 for Everton. Swansea up against Watford, Swansea at home, first home game for Bob Bradley as manager. Do you think he'll have enough in his box to get them out of trouble and keep them up? Because they've slipped into the relegation zone now. I think they're sitting in 19th. It's a bit of a concerning time if you're a Swansea supporter. Or do you think, do you think maybe that they're just sort of on that slide back down?
I think the problem that they had last year hasn't really changed. They don't have a recognised high calibre centre forward. How they turned down, look, I know he was Scheissenhausen at City, but how they turned down taking back Wilfried Boney is just beyond me. They weren't really competitive in the market at all. And so, what's his name? Who's the Icelandic guy?
Sigurdsson.
Sigurdsson. Wasn't he playing up front last week?
He might have been.
Like a false nine?
I know they had Llorente, but he might be injured at the moment, and they had someone else who they bought as their record signing, but I think he hasn't done much either.
Borja.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to thinking that they're not going to be able to score enough goals this year. But they've lost Ashley Williams, who's probably the heart and soul of the club. So yeah, I think they'll struggle, and I think they'll. Saying that, I reckon they'll get a point. 1-1.
Watford seem to be the new Southampton, where they can change their manager, they can go against all sorts of conventional wisdom in sacking the manager, bringing someone new in, ditching half the squad, bringing in a whole bunch of new players, changing pretty much everything year on year, and yet they just seem to, whether you could say this is an improvement on last season, I don't know, but at least they're still as good as they were last season, and it's pretty incredible that they've kind of done this, and they're almost establishing themselves as a mid-table Premier League club already.
They shouldn't have. Who was the manager last year?
Flores.
Yeah, they shouldn't have got rid of Flores. I mean, despite the results they've achieved, they're really scraping the barrel. And a lot of these games, getting the right bounce of the ball and that kind of stuff, they're not playing anywhere near, I think, the football they were playing last year, which was very kind of attacking and fun and this kind of stuff. And so they've relied on a fair few golazzos this year from guys like Tripue, who started the season on fire to kind of get them over the line. They'll certainly do enough. Touch wood before I put the mic on them to survive this year. And look, under the current ownership, whatever people say that it's ridiculous the way they're kind of owned by Udinese, and there's like 4 other clubs in that kind of group that just move players between them. The owners have shown a long history of success in this model, so I can see them staying up and establishing themselves as a kind of middle tier Premier League club going forward.
Liverpool at home to West Brom. West Brom proved a bit of a bogey side for Liverpool in recent years, and have that sort of style that can upset the way that Klopp might want to play the game, as we saw, I guess. Not that I'm comparing United to West Brom necessarily, but that more defensive style of play can sort of stem that attacking talent that Liverpool has. Do you see West Brom getting points here against Liverpool?
Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Matip and Lovren. I think Karius has shown in the admittedly limited vision that I've seen of him, that he's a little bit shaky under the high ball, that's not a criticism of him going forward. It's just that in the Premier League, there's a lot more balls in the box and there's a lot more physical centre forwards who are going to get in your face and make life difficult for you, and there's an adjustment period there. So I'm pretty sure Pulis will be instructing them to put the ball in the box a fair bit, so West Brom might find some success there. But look, I think that Liverpool will be smarting from the result on Monday night and be looking to, not necessarily bounce back, but kind of make a statement. Daniel Sturridge, is he going to start? Yeah. Big question. Does he go with Origi, or does he just go with Firmino up front? Look, I'll say 2-1 Liverpool in this game. I think they'll create enough chances.
I think, as you said earlier, the word with Daniel Sturridge is confidence, which just seems to be utterly lacking at the moment, and it'll be really interesting because, if he doesn't start this game, especially after the way he played against United, it might be really tough for him to find his way back into the side, particularly with the way that the rest of the side are playing, and they're really not missing having that sort of recognised striker. And Firmino playing as that centre forward is working wonders for them, so they don't really need a Sturridge in the side. And certainly if he's not performing, it'll be it'd be really interesting to see if he starts in this one.
I'll tell you who else isn't performing. Mamadou Sakho's performance in the under-23s against United was pitiful.
Yeah.
Pitiful.
Just lost all interest in trying to get back in the side, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's much doubt he'll be off in January. Basically, let a United midfielder walk past him with the ball, and then he went into the box and got the resulting penalty to tie the game up. He just looked completely disinterested for 90 minutes. So I dare say he'll be on his way out. And look, I'm not totally against the way that Klopp's trying to handle that situation. I just think it kind of shows maybe that once you get in his bad books, maybe there aren't too many ways out, or it's hard to kind of work your way out of that. So for Sturridge, if he doesn't play well in this game, he might find it difficult to come back long term.
Yeah. Man City at home to Southampton. Presuming, of course, Aguero and De Bruyne both managed to start this game, do you see City sort of clicking back into gear, or do you think there's still a few issues they have to work out?
Well, with them, as I said, they'll create enough chances to win the game twice over. It's just a matter of if they take them this week. So is Kun 100%? Is he going to play? What's his confidence like? He's been missing a lot more chances this year than we're probably used to seeing him miss. He's usually, I've always talked about him being very clinical, and almost whenever he gets a chance he scores. So this might be this early season form might be an aberration for him. But I'm not totally convinced by Claude Puel, although The team has been slowly building throughout the year, but you're pretty much outside of danger at the top four. I think you got to back in Man City in every game this year, and so I'd say they'll win this 3-1.
Yeah, I mean, Puel for Southampton's one, I haven't been too convinced by either, and they certainly started the season quite slowly. And you do have to think that at some point all of this changing of managers and draining of talent has got to have its toll on Southampton. I mean, it doesn't seem to have had it toll yet, and Charlie Austin's looking fantastic for them. But yeah, it's going to be hard to back against Man City in this one, I think. The final game up for discussion, the final game of the round, I suppose you'd call it, is Chelsea at home to Manchester United. And there's a little bit of heat in this one. Jose going back to Stamford Bridge for the first time as Manchester United manager anyway. I think I saw that he beat Chelsea as Inter Milan manager in the Champions League when he last faced his former employers, it might have been. How do you see him handling this game? Do you think he'll have that extra bit of motivation to really go out and win the game, or do you think he'll sort of set up again for containing Chelsea?
He's a professional, mate. I don't think he's the kind of guy who's going to be overcome by emotion. I mean, with comparisons to like Fergie was an emotional manager at times, and at times it cost him, and at times it helped him. But Mourinho is the ultimate professional, and I don't think he's trying to worry about his history. He's been talking about that through it's over the last 24 hours, and kind of a few little pot shots at Abramovich, but as all smart players and managers do, the fans believed in me, but the fans that make the decisions, all like that kind of stuff. So I think if he wants to put one over anyone, it'll be put one over Abramovich.
So do you think from that comment that he'll get a warm reception?
I'd be very surprised. I mean, well, hang on. The old school Chelsea fans who would try and beat him up and boo him, they can't afford tickets these days, so they won't be around. But I think surely he's the best manager in their history, to test-wise. So you would think that they would applaud him. I mean, he brought them 3 league titles?
Yeah.
In 6 years at the club, and on the verge of Champions League success on multiple occasions. Took them as far as they've ever gone, pretty much, in the Champions League, and brought through lots of players and brought probably half of their all-time greatest teams. So you'd think he'd get a decent reception. I find it really hard to get a read on how he'll set up. I'm not sure he'll go for the totally negating tactics. He'll probably look at, and I'm not smart enough to work out what he's going to do and how he'll look to exploit Conte's tactics. I mean, with him, it's always nullify the opposition's strengths first, then how do we win the game? I don't think he'll set up to draw the game. But in saying that, I think it might be a little bit boring and might finish 1-1.
Yeah, I probably get the same sense. I mean, I think Mourinho in the big games does seem to be a bit more cautious and set up to, as you say, negate the other managers' tactics first before trying to win the game. Be really interesting to see this one in terms of the dynamics between Mourinho and the Chelsea supporters, and how they do react. I mean, I assume, as you say, they'll give him a positive reception. It wasn't as if he walked out on the club, he was sacked, and whilst there was that poor start, I think there was certainly recognition that the players were certainly at fault for that as well. So it'll be
lots of the fans were blaming.
Yeah.
Well, there was almost a campaign to sell Cesc Fabregas.
Yeah. So that'll.
I mean,
It'll be interesting, but I assume he'll get a positive reaction from there. I think it'll be a draw as well. I think maybe a 1-1 or maybe even a 2-2 draw. If there's a little bit of goalmouth action from Rashford, it'll be interesting to see from your lineup whether Rashford does start up top, or do you think he'll go with Ibra again, or is it sort of time for change?
Oh, look, I don't. I personally think it's time for change, and you'd think with guys like Louise and John Terry that maybe having Rashford on the last shoulder might be a smart thing to do and to play balls over the top. But I can kind of see Rashford, he'll play, no doubt he'll play, but I think he'll play right wing. And he played right wing through pretty much all the way through his youth career, apart from his last year in the 18s. That's not really a problem. But Yeah, I fancy him to play Ibrahimovic just because of the size of the game.
Yeah.
And he's not, Ibrahimovic does alright against Chelsea. He was really good last year in the Champions League against them, so I'm not too worried about that.
Well, thank you for coming on, Bojan.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
No problem, and thank you everyone for listening in. It's been a pretty interesting week of football last weekend in the Premier League, and hopefully it's another set of interesting games tonight and tomorrow night from our point of view. So until next time, I hope your team wins, and we'll see you on the forums.